All right, recording in progress. So let's jump into tonight's. So I was kind of trying to this morning trying to decide what I want to talk about tonight, and I've seen quite a few posts lately about people in several areas, not just our area, talking about non-vocal elk and just how quiet it was this year and how few bugles. Other than I've got a follower of Elk Calling Academy that lives down in Arizona. He can't draw a tag. The guy always goes out every year with a video camera. He happened to message me one day when I was up on the mountain doing one of my solo hunts into a new area, and I hadn't heard a bugle for 2 days, and he's blown up my phone about how he's heard maybe 1,000 bugles that day. And every text he sent in just pissed me off more and more with each step that I frickin' took. And so now this morning when I was thinking about what to talk about, I decided to go on this subject. Now, we're gonna tap in and see if there's any movie buffs in here. So because there is a line that I will constantly say on the mountainside when we are trying to locate and we're not getting any bugles, and I will look at Bryce and I will just go, "Now why don't they write?" You guys remember that line from any movies? Now why don't they write?
Sounds like Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump.
Nope.
No.
Kevin
You
Cost Kevin Costner movie. The individual was the wagon driver that was sending him out. And remember, Kevin finds those two bodies that had the arrows, and the guy walks up and he goes, now back east there's somebody sitting. Now why don't they write? And so that's something that I will always
Dances with
price.
Wolves.
Dances with Wolves. There we go.
Love
So
that movie.
yeah, so basically, yeah, when we're walking on the mountainside and we've covered a bit of ground and we're not getting any bugles or anything, we see the tracks, we see the sign, and I will just it's something that I just do to lighten the mood because we get we get so focused on not hearing anything, and it just kind of brings your spirits down and everything. And the reason I do that is because it forces Bryce to laugh a little bit and remind him that you could go all day long without hearing a bugle. And then within the last hour of light on that day, you could light something up that could turn into one of the most magical days that you've ever had in the Elk Woods. So just like cresting over a ridge and bugling on the backside or coming around the bend of a trail, there are so many things that can change during the course of a hunt. And so, but like I said, I was kind of sitting there and I was like, okay, what do we want to talk about? We're going to talk about why won't they bugle? I mean, it's the rut. They should be. It's what they do. They're a dynamic herd animal that's very, very vocal. But so there's several factors that can go into it. And the number one factor that really contributes to the amount of bugling you hear or the lack of bugling that you hear is a bull to cow ratio. A higher bull to cow ratio, you're going to hear more bugling activity. Reason being is you have a higher number of bulls that are competing for the cows, and so you have a lot more competition. So those bulls are a lot more vocal. So if you're hunting in areas that have a high bull to cow ratio, you are going to hear a lot of bugling. And that's why this year, why there's a lot of posts online that some people are like, man, the elk are just not bugling at all. We're not hearing anything. And then you have those people that are like, you're crazy. I've been out 8 days and I've heard multiple bugles every single day. The difference is you have one person that's hunting in a low bull to cow ratio area, less competition, less bugling, versus another person that's hunting in a high bull to cow ratio, higher level of competition, higher level of bugling. So that's the number one contributing factor to how many bulls. And I let you guys know this past September was the fewest bugles that I've ever heard in a September. And what was weird, and I really got to thinking about this, is there was several areas that we went into that there was bulls hanging out together that had no cows. I mean, even third week of September, which should be the peak rut, and here's bulls without a single cow. And then what's crazy, you go 300, 350 yards the other direction into to the south into another drainage. You get elevated above that drainage, you can glass in there. And there was two 4 points in there. In fact, one of them was the 4 point that I called in that first morning. Two 4 points in there that had three cows each, but they lived on different parts of this drainage. No other bulls around. So you think a little 4 point with three cows and no other bulls around, do you think that sucker's going to pipe off?
I don't think so.
No. No. Nope. He's gonna tuck into his little pocket of trees and stay within his little realm that he likes going through. And he ain't gonna say a word because he doesn't want to draw attention. So now the thing that's interesting is when he starts having those cows come into estrus, he is going to be vocal, but the only problem is it's going to be low audible type sounds. It's going to be your huffs, your grunts, your glunks, your raking, those type of things that he's going to be doing. He's still going to be vocal, but it's not going to be those things that's going to broadcast that you're going to hear 2, 3, 4, 500 yards away. That's going to draw attention from other bulls around. Those 4 points knew that those other bulls were just around the ridge. They also knew that living right above them was a big 6 point that had probably half a dozen cows. Now the big 6 point, he would crack off, but he'd crack off from a distance. But he also knew that he was the big boy in that area. He wasn't worried about everybody else. Okay, bull to cow ratio, number one contributing factor. Number two, predators. What's in the area? Do you have a high population of wolves? In fact, I have no idea what that was, but I just had fireworks and fluorescent green things pop up all over my screen. Don't know. So I saw another post that somebody was recounting their elk season. They posted a picture of a 5x6 that had been picked clean. It was basically just the head, the rack, and then the skeleton. And they posted a story with it, and they said that morning they heard two bulls start bugling. The wolves immediately started howling. One bull shut up and left the drainage. The second bull stayed in there and bugled and continued to bugle.
Wow.
That's the carcass that they found. So elk in Idaho and Montana, Wyoming have lived long enough with wolves that they've evolved, that they know if they make a sound and they hear a wolf howl, they need to shut up and vacate the premise. It's not just go quiet, because the wolves are going to lock into where that sound came from, and they're going to go over and they're going to investigate that area. So those elk will shut up and vacate that area because they know. Now some other areas, Eastern Oregon, Eastern Washington, wolves are starting to, wolves have been crossing the border the last couple of years. Those elk are first, second, or third generation elk that are still learning and evolving to live with wolves. That's why you hear a lot of people in Eastern Washington and Eastern Oregon talk about the elk herds just getting decimated. Same thing happened in Idaho when the wolves were first released. I mean, they just hit the numbers hard and dropped. We had several areas where elk numbers were above objective that they got hit so hard they dropped so far below objective that Fish and Game really started adjusting the seasons on them. So predator is the second one. Then you also have hunting pressure. And you will see the elk change their vocalizations if you have a really, really high hunting pressure. And what's going to ultimately happen is those elk are going to get pushed out of that area that have the high pressure and they're going to move into a low pressure area. You're still going to have some stragglers hanging in there. But the only thing is, those stragglers that are hanging in there is now you just created a low bull to cow ratio with no competition. And so the pressure basically, the pressure could have, it could have been in a high bull to cow ratio area, but the hunting pressure goes in there and hits it so hard and it pushes a good majority of them out that now those that remain in the area, now it becomes a low bull to cow ratio area. And that just shuts that bugling out action off too, because they don't have to compete. Or they know that if they do pipe off a sound, they're going to get surrounded with 6 different hunting groups that are just clamoring down on top of them. And so that's why we focus on working areas, and that's why we kind of do things a little bit differently with our calling. We add in a lot of the low audible sounds. We do the tandem calling, and that's why, the last episode when I was talking about things that I learned when I talked about the tandem calling and how effective that was, and how it took a quiet forest. I mean, an hour and a half long of a single caller doing the breeding sequence, an hour and a half, nothing. But just 5 minutes or less of two of us tandem calling and acting like two bulls competing for a hot cow. All of a sudden, we have 3 bulls screaming at us that were there the whole time. They didn't magically all of a sudden come into the area. They were there. They just chose not to say anything with just the one single. So, okay. Any questions so far?
Nope.
Nope. So now, Greg, were you guys hunting a pretty heavily pressured area?
Well, part of the area was closed because of fires. So yeah, it was putting a lot of pressure on the open area.
Oh, huh. We might have to talk because I kind of have a good idea of where you were. Because we won't talk on here, but
Yeah, we can talk.
my area was the same thing. So I'm wondering if we're just on opposite sides of the mountain from each other. So could be, maybe. So, anyways, okay. There's a lot of things out there that heat and all that kind of stuff will come into play and also affect the amount of bugling. Honestly, in my experience, it doesn't. So, I mean, uh, I've had seasons before at the start of the season where it's 90 degrees on the mountainside and I've got bulls screaming at 1 o'clock in the afternoon when it's, really hot. Now, the one thing that the heat does do is temperature will affect the amount of activity with the elk. So, because elk basically don't really have a way to regulate, they don't sweat like we do to regulate temperature. So, they have to be very, very careful not to get too overworked or not to heat up too much, because if they do, basically they have an aneurysm. So they can't handle it. Their body shuts down, system starts failing, and their brain just gets fried. So hotter temperatures, a lot less activity, but that's where you guys have heard me talk about it before. That's where you start looking for those dark, cool draws, where as soon as you walk in, I mean, it's 10 to 15 degrees cooler than any place on the mountain. You immediately know as soon as you get into that place. So heat, no, it really doesn't have an effect on the amount of bugling. Full moon, that's another thing you'll hear people talk about. Not really. So, and the reason I think people talk about the full moon having a correlation on the amount that they bugle is because on bright night or bright moon nights, the elk are a lot more active at night and they go to bed earlier. And I don't really want to say, unfortunately, most hunters return back to camp for midday. because I don't want to say unfortunately, because that means there's less people out on the mountain during the midday. So a lot of people think during a bright moon night, you only have like an hour, hour and a half in the morning and maybe 30 minutes at night. The rest of the day is a waste. That's absolutely not true. And the reason that they say full moon affects the amount of bugling you hear during the day is because those elk start heading to bed so early that you may only hear one or two bugles, because by the time it really gets light and you get up onto elevation close to them, they're close enough to their bedding area that they stop bugling anyways. They do that. They stop bugling when they get close to their bedding area because they don't really want to attract and broadcast, where they're bedding at. And then, at night, they really don't move until, yeah, that last 30 minutes, maybe right at last sliver of light. So that's why you only hear that bugling. But if you are out there during the middle of the day and you're close to the bedding area, you are going to hear bugling. You are going to hear bulls get up and start running around, checking their cows, milling around, eating. So you will hear the bugling. So full moon doesn't affect the amount of bugling. It only affects the amount of bugling you're going to hear during the day, because they're so active at night, and you'll hear a lot of bugling activity at night. So, okay. So we've hit bull to cow ratio, predators, pressure, heat or temperature, and then full moon. So now, what can we do when we get into these situations when the elk just won't bugle? That comes the time where covering ground is really not a good tactic, because it doesn't matter if you hike a mile during the day or if you hike 10 miles during the day. If they're not vocal, they're not vocal. You're not going to, it doesn't matter how much you hike. Now, the more important thing is understanding your hunt area and working those areas longer. Don't be so quick just to blow through an area. And this is where studying your area, understanding where the bedding areas are, understanding travel corridors, knowing your approach routes into those are the benefit, because then you know exactly where they are going to be and where you can spend more time. And it's going to be tough to try to catch them in the transition area, because if they're not bugling, you don't actually know where they are in that transition area. But if you know where they bed, you know where they're heading. And so basically, instead of working those transition areas to try to catch them in transition, just get close to those bedding areas as fast as you can, but make sure you're off to the side, that you're controlling your thermals. Your thermals aren't blowing down to that group that's coming in. You're off to the side. You're, controlling where your thermals are going. And then you set up and you do a lot of blind calling scenarios. Because what's going to happen is, as they get close to that, when they get to their bedding area, they don't just walk right into their bedding area and bed down. They get in there, they mill around, they still eat just a little bit more. Maybe they've got water nearby that they'll get a drink, and then they bed down. So they have a little bit of time that they're still up on the hoof and they're walking around. And that's where you working that area and taking the time to cold call and work in that area can, you may not necessarily light them up and get them bugling, but there's a really, really good chance that you can call them in. And that's the really tough part, because when they're silent like that, man, you don't know where they're going to come from. So you really have to be ready, because you don't know where they're going to come from and you don't know when they're going to come in. You could plan on being there for an hour and you could have an elk come in 5 minutes, or you can have an elk come in 50 minutes. You never know. I mean, we had that one group the second day in the evening that I think, you'll see it on video. I think it's 4 minutes and 37 seconds of me calling, and then they were there. They were running in. Now, earlier in that day, there's an hour and a half video of me doing a blind calling routine and nothing. So, okay.
Mm.
Larry, were you asking a question, Larry?
Yeah.
Your phone keeps freezing up on us.
Is that you're referring? Oh, sorry. I'll text you later.
Well, try it again because you actually came through that time.
Video that you're referring to? Where is that?
It's on my camera.
Oh,
So it's on my camera. I have that, and also I have a video of an active wallow and what makes an active wallow, because I know the questions come in a few times. How can you tell if a wallow is active? This one's pretty dang easy. As soon as you see the video, you're going to know, yep, that's an active wallow. But I kind of go through and point out signs to look at wallows to know, one, how active they are, two, how long ago they've been hit, and all that kind of stuff. So I just need to get those edited. The one calling sequence is it was kind of a filming of a blind calling routine for the new e-course, but I may just go ahead and edit that and drop that in here for y'all, so that way you don't have to wait on that one. So, and it's also, the other reason I'm going to drop it in is because pretty much all the vocalizations I was doing on that was on that new Native by Carlton reed that I tested this year, so you guys can hear how that sounds out in the woods. So, okay, so that's pretty much what I had for tonight for why won't they bugle? And yeah, Larry, you missed the trivia question. So we covered that one. I threw a line out from a movie to see who would remember the line and who would tag it to the movie, and Mr. Joel jumped on that one. So, all right, any questions?
No question, but I have a comment. Uh, your breeding sequence, Fritz and I tried that. We ended up calling it party. Be prepared, because we set up, I set my bow down and turned to take my pack off, and Fritz was digging in his pack to get another cow call. But in the meantime, we're both calling, and we could hear something like a gallop. And we turned, and from about over 150, 160 yards, here comes a cow into about 15, 18 yards and just stopped. And we are nowhere near our bows.
Yeah. Um,
failure point.
yeah, we've had that happen before. In fact, I remember one time Bryce and Brandon and I were up on the mountain, and I think Brandon was the only one that had a tag left, and so we were doing a midday routine. We'd kind of worked into this meadow area just below, or just kind of off to the side of a bedding area. And so I said, okay, Brandon, you're the shooter, so you need to have an arrow knocked, and you need to stay alert, and you need to stay ready. And he goes, what are you going to do? I took my pack off and I laid down on the ground and rested my head on the pack, and I tipped my hat down, and I would push the reed out and barely hang it with my lips. And he got so enamored, because I mean, this is about 10 minutes in, but he goes, you fell asleep. And he goes, and you would be, he goes, I was just so enamored of watching you, because you would kind of start snoring lightly, and then you'd pop the reed in your mouth, and you'd throw two, three, four cow calls out. Then you'd pop, shoot the reed back out of your mouth, and you'd get back into this light snoring. He goes, it kind of lulled me. He goes, so I laid down too. And then he said, next thing he looked up, and there was a smoke in a pancake, which is a spike in a cow, standing about 18 yards from him. And all of a sudden, just here's all this clutter of these elk just taking off. And I sit up and I'm looking up, and Bryce had laid down also, and he fell asleep. I mean, in just 10 minutes, it was midday. But anyways, all this noise just, and I was like, what the heck just happened? And Brandon goes, that was a spike in a cow running out. I go, you mean running in? He goes, no, running out. And I said, well, how the heck did they get in the first place? And he goes, yeah, I kind of was standing here. I was on my knees. I had an arrow knocked and I was ready. And just from behind me, all I could hear was of your little light snoring. And it kind of made me tired. So I took the arrow off my bow, put it in the quiver, and I laid down. And then after about 3 minutes of laying down, I heard thump thump and a twig snap and looked up, and there's a spike in the cow at 18 yards. And I said, so why did they take off? He goes, because I tried to do a ninja, grab my bow, knock an arrow, draw while getting up to my feet all in one smooth motion. The only problem is it wasn't smooth. It wasn't very graceful. And obviously they weren't very impressed with it. So that's why they took back off to the other side of the mountain. So yes, always be ready. If you're going to set up and do any calling routines, always be ready, because you never know. I mean, I can remember another time we had kind of hiked up into this new area. Well, we had taken the side by sides around the back, and then we kind of hiked up and got into this rocky basin area that just looked great that we wanted to bugle. And man, we were bugling down in it and nothing. And so we thought we were too early, so we sat down on the mountainside. And so these two wanted to learn how to do the buzz mew. And so I was teaching them how to do the buzz mew on the mountainside. And I mean, they would, and we would just start freaking laughing. And one of them would do the buzz mew again, and it sounded horrible, and we'd laugh again. And I mean, we were just laughing back and forth. And all of a sudden, I looked down, and about 25 yards, there's a cow standing there just staring at us. And we're talking out loud, and we're laughing and everything. So yeah, you never ever know when they're going to come in. And it's tough sometimes. I mean, you're getting kicked in the teeth day after day after day, and you just drop your guard down, and dang it, that's when it happens.
Yeah, that reminds me of a story my dad tells me all the time. He said they were up on the mountain, they had horses, they had all their guns back behind the point. They had these calls that were like the old buck calls that had two pieces of plastic and rubber bands on them.
Yep.
And he said they were just out there and it sounded like dying ducks, and they were just laughing and calling and doing whatever. And then all of a sudden, a whole herd of elk come flying in.
It always happens when you're not ready.
Mm-hmm.
Always. I've got a buddy that's a guide, and he always tells me if he's got a client in and they've been a couple of days and not much has happened, he said he'll get to a spot and he'll just tell his hunter, just sit on a log right there. And he'll take his pack off and he'll pull a sandwich out. And that client will be like, what the heck are you doing? He goes, just trust me. And he says it never fails. As soon as you break out a sandwich and start eating a sandwich, you're going to hear a bugle or there's going to be an elk. So he calls it his sandwich tactic. So
I need to try that one.
yeah, I know. I don't think, well, no, there's been a few times where I've stopped for lunch and, got everything out of the pack and started, and the bull cracked off. And it's amazing how fast you can throw that stuff back in the pack and get going. But yeah, for the most time, it's when break for lunch, we're breaking for lunch. So, all right, guys. Well, if that is it, then we are going to wrap it up for tonight. So,
Hey, Mike, real quick.
yes.
I've got a late season opens on the 29th
Yep.
here locally. And any elk unit, they're, we're talking a couple elk per 100 square miles out here. They're pretty rare. almost rarer than hen's teeth.
Okay.
But I know there's a small herd out there. We're talking a little bit of sage for cover,
Okay.
and it's modern rifle for deer, so I got to wear orange. Am I pretty much guaranteed I better have some sort of decoy?
Yes, because if you try to do vocalizations, any vocalizations that you do, they'll be able to see from a long ways away. Now, if you are going to use a decoy, don't spend very much time by the decoy. So, um, is it an archery hunt for you guys or any weapon?
Archery.
It is archery. Still, with rifle hunt during, for deer going on in the same place, even with orange, I wouldn't hang out very close to the decoy. So, set the decoy up, get 25, 30, 40 yards off to one side. If you're going to do some calling, just do some light calling, focus on distressed calf, lost calf.
Okay.
Just throw a few out, then go quiet. Really keep your movements subtle. And just, really let that decoy do its job.
Okay. And any preference on, just a rump or a head or?
I prefer the rump. So, because anything coming in that sees the rump, they're going to have to come in, because any elk that's going to come in wants to make eye contact with that elk. So that is one of the ways that they communicate. They'll come in close, and eye contact is the first. So if you have the full silhouette, they can stop from a distance and just sit there and just try to lock eyes. And then all of a sudden it's like, man, that cow's really weird. She hasn't blinked. She hasn't flicked an ear to get a fly off. She hasn't done anything. The rump gives the indication that her head's down and she's feeding. And so they actually have to come in closer to get that eye contact.
Okay. All right. Well, I might. It's fairly close, so I might try and do a couple of day hunts, and it's fairly open, so a lot of spotting and hoping I find something that I can pursue. But
take a look at the topography of the land too. I'm sure you'll have some creek drainages and that kind of stuff and ditches that you can use to move around, so you're not moving around up on top quite a bit. So especially if you do, see something, at a distance and you kind of want to cut ground, use some of that to use as much of that topography to your advantage as you can.
Right. Yeah, it's mostly highland desert. Basalt flows pretty flat, but there's a little bit of topography.
Okay. Yeah, just use anything that you can to help shield your movements. So, because they can see a long ways away out in that stuff.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
You bet. Jim, you were going to start to say something?
Yeah, I've got a question for you. You ever had a reed that doesn't work right? Like I have my go-to reed is my gray amp.
Uh-huh.
And I brand new gray amp, and I can't get that thing to work with a beam. And I really didn't open a new one up that I have to try it, but I don't know what the deal is with that breed.
Is it something did you just buy it this year?
Yes.
Okay.
Took it on the hunt, and I can't barely get a chuckle out of it or anything, because it's like something. It's the same size as the other ones.
Yep.
But I don't know what the deal is with it.
It just could be a bad batch of latex. I noticed I went through 4 white amps this year. So they just, right out of the package, they'd be fine. But then after half a day of calling, they were done. So I ended up digging into my call pouch for some reeds that I had bought last year that I had used just a little bit. So I don't know if they just got a bad batch of latex in, but also too, your favorite reed is just like your favorite child. There's going to be days that it misbehaves, and so you kind of have to put it in timeout. Maybe you need to put it back in the call pouch for a day and use another reed and let it think about what it's doing.
No, I've done that. It just doesn't work.
Oh,
yeah. It's just, it's in the penalty box now. It's been there for a while.
Oh yeah. I put mine in timeout for a day. Sometimes, pull them out the next morning. They're still misbehaving. So back into timeout they go, and maybe they got to stay in there for 2-3 days.
I just pulled this thing out yesterday and tried it again. And I'm like, man, this thing's just a piece of junk.
Yeah, no, I think it's I think it's they got some bad latex in, so
Yeah. Okay. All
which
right.
does happen. So
All right. Okay. Thanks.
okay,
I had an interesting encounter. Um, this guy
really, yeah, Pine Martin.
came into about 5 feet from me. Yeah.
They are
Oh,
so they are such a cool creature because you know they're vicious little dudes, but they are also extremely curious. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I can tell you a story about a pine marten in Maine. I was on a Maine bear hunt, and they put bags up of donuts hanging from the tree. And
uh-huh.
I'm in the tree stand, and this pine marten wants to get the donuts out of the tree. This pine marten climbed little saplings, and the saplings kept falling over. Finally, decided to jump up onto the tree, climb the tree over the top, jump on a bag, and try to rip the bag open. Kept falling on the ground. Finally, this pine marten, and I'm not kidding, I swear to God, got on the side of the tree and starts doing this number and jumps and leaps through the air trying to get to the bag, does it over and over. I couldn't even hunt because it was so funny watching this stupid pine marten do all these tricks. I am not, I've seen nothing like it. Wish I had it on video.
Oh, have you ever seen them go after a grouse?
No,
They're
Yeah,
really
yeah.
vicious.
Oh yeah, they'll go after squirrels. They'll go after grouse. So they're pretty cool to watch. So so yeah, that's a pretty cool encounter there, Greg.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh,
I enjoyed it. He got within 4 feet he was on a tree on the side while I'm trying to get the camera out. He turned and come around in on the trail and at me and then stood up. And that's when I got the picture. So
that's awesome. Very cool.
yeah.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've ran into one of those guys. I think the last thing I ran into was a white weasel. So in a slash pile. So he was pretty interested in what I was doing. He wanted to hang out and see what was going on, and so so I pulled a bunch of peanuts out of the trail mix and kind of put those on the log for him. So as I was departing, so. All right, guys. Well, we will wrap it up tonight. So, as always, keep calling, keep practicing. More importantly, though, have fun. And we will see you guys in 2 weeks, maybe. It's going to be the 26th. Liz has surgery that morning, so I'm going to be kind of doctoring her for a little bit. But if she's doing pretty good or she's zonked out, I'll see if I can jump on and do a little something
Don't,
something that night. What's that?
don't push,
Yeah.
don't push it.
Yeah, I know, I know. So
Yeah.
I'll just slide a few extra pain meds and get her to Loopyville and so. Oh, baby, I was sitting here the whole time. I don't know what you mean. I was gone. I didn't leave your side. So
Yeah.
Careful because you're going to put
Best,
this recording.
yeah,
But-
yeah, exactly.
best wishes with the surgery.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. So, all right, guys, have a great night. We'll talk to you guys later.